When people are talking about the greatest of all time in anything, they love to list things as the Mount Rushmore. It's just a fancy way of saying the top 4 or something, but for some reason, calling things the Mount Rushmore of blank has become a staple in debates about the greatest. Anything and everything is a Mount Rushmore. Movies, TV, video games, even fast food. Literally anything can have its own Mount Rushmore, and sports are no exception. There's been discussion for every single sporting event in the world. ESPN has gotten hours upon hours of content of them just talking about Mount Rushmores over and over again. They especially love to talk about the Mount Rushmore of the NBA. There's no better nonsense conversation about basketball that will get people to click on a video than LeBron vs. Jordan. It's the GOAT of GOAT debates. Add on 2 more players for a Mount Rushmore and you get double the fun. When people think of the NBA Mount Rushmore, the guys that come to mind are Jordan, LeBron, and Kareem as 3 locks, and then the 4th spot is up for more debate, but I would imagine the majority of basketball fans choose Magic Johnson. Jordan, LeBron, Kareem, Magic. It's a great top 4 players of all time list. Those 4 are not the Mount Rushmore of the NBA though. Multiple players on the list don't even make the Mount Rushmore. Now just listen for a second, let me explain. Do not start writing your hate comments just yet. Let me read this excerpt from the National Park Service's website about the real Mount Rushmore. Cue the patriotic music. American history, alive and stone. Majestic figures of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, surrounded by the beauty of the Black Hills of South Dakota, tell the story of the birth, growth, development, and preservation of this country. The real-life Mount Rushmore isn't the 4 best presidents ever. It's 4 of the most influential presidents that have helped form the USA into what it is today. And if the real Mount Rushmore isn't listing the 4 best presidents of all time, then the NBA Mount Rushmore shouldn't list the 4 best NBA players of all time. So who are the 4 NBA players that shaped the game into what it is today? Which 4 players tell the story of the birth, growth, development, and preservation of the NBA? Before I dig into this, I just want to say if you enjoy the video, hit that subscribe button. I'm on the quest to 1,000 subscribers. It'd make me very happy if you subscribed. Alright, let's get into it. George Washington is the first ever president, so representing the birth of America is an easy choice. But there isn't a first ever basketball player. James Naismith invented the game, but he was dead before the NBA was even a thing. When people think of older players, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain are the 2 that come to mind. But when they were rookies, the league had already been going on for 10 years. The player that best represents the birth of the NBA goes by the moniker of Mr. Basketball. George Lawrence Mikan Jr. He is the face of the birth of the NBA. Before the NBA existed, George Mikan played for the Minneapolis Lakers of the NBL and BAA, 2 separate basketball associations that in 1949 merged together to create a new league, the National Basketball Association. As part of the NBA, Mikan led the Minneapolis Lakers to 5 championships in 6 seasons. He was the leader of the first ever dynasty in NBA history. In Mikan's most dominant season, he averaged 28.4 points per game. The next closest player averaged 21.7 points per game, almost 7 less points than Mikan. Mikan was also the cause of multiple rule changes that are still seen in the NBA today. Before Mikan, goaltending was allowed in basketball. There was no one else that played that could effectively goaltend every shot of the opponent. The size of the paint below the basket also increased from 6 feet to 12 feet. Mikan was able to stand just outside the paint and easily get rebounds since he was so much taller than any other player. Mikan is also the reason that the 24-second shot clock was created. On November 20th, 1950, the Fort Wayne Pistons defeated the Lakers 19-18, the lowest scoring NBA game ever. When the Pistons had the ball, they would hold onto it for as long as possible so that Mikan wouldn't be able to have the ball in his hands. George Mikan was regarded as the best player in basketball history during the infancy of the professional sport. He was named the greatest player of the first half century in 1950. The NBA was 1 season old at that point, so Mikan came into the league as a dominant force and is a huge part of making the game what it is today. There's no better man to represent the birth of the NBA than Mr. Basketball himself. Thomas Jefferson represents the growth of the United States on Mount Rushmore. He was the country's third president, and he was the president during the Louisiana Purchase, which is when the United States bought a ton of land from the French, essentially doubling the size of the country. Take a quick look at this picture of the United States back in 1803. The US is over there on the right. Then Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory, expanding the country with the biggest purchase of land in recorded history. Jefferson is an easy choice to represent the growth of the country. The biggest growth in the history of the NBA happened in 1975, when the NBA merged with the American Basketball Association. The NBA-ABA merger made it so there was no more competition for the premier professional basketball league. There was no better player to represent this period than Julius Erving, famously known as Dr. J. When the two leagues merged, the number of NBA teams only changed from 18 to 22, far from doubling the size like the Louisiana Purchase did for the United States. But the players that joined the league instantly made an impact, solidifying themselves among the best of the best. In the first season of the merger, 10 of 24 NBA All-Stars were from the ABA, 7 of the top 12 players in MVP voting were from the ABA, and in the NBA Finals, 5 of the 10 starters from the two teams came from the ABA. These players instantly made a huge impact in the league, and Dr. J was the best of them. Prior to the merger, Dr. J had already won 3 ABA MVPs and 2 ABA championships. He added another MVP and another championship as a member of the Philadelphia 76ers during his 11-year NBA career. He's also considered the man that established dunking in basketball. While players did dunk before Erving, it was big men getting rebounds and then going directly back up to the basket. Dr. J became the first player to consistently drive to the basket, looking to dunk. Players before him wouldn't jump several feet away from the basket into a dunk like every single player in the NBA does today. The NBA-ABA merger certified the NBA as the premier professional basketball league in the world, and no better player symbolizes this growth than Dr. J, Julius Erving, the best ABA player ever. Theodore Roosevelt was chosen as the president to represent the development of the United States on Mount Rushmore. Of the 4 presidents that were engraved in the mountain, he's probably the most questioned choice, but Roosevelt deserves to be on there. Among many great acts that Roosevelt performed, his greatest was overseeing the construction of the Panama Canal. This canal linked the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, allowing for trade ships to sail through the canal instead of going all the way around America. He created a bridge between the East and West, helping to make America into the worldwide superpower it would become. While Roosevelt was questionable to some, there's no questioning this player's inclusion on the NBA Mount Rushmore. There is no NBA player in history who was more instrumental in developing the league into the worldwide icon that it is today than His Airness, Michael Jordan. Widely regarded as the greatest basketball player of all time, Jordan dominated the league, being selected to 14 All-Star games, winning 5 MVPs and 6 championships. MJ is arguably still the most popular basketball player alive today, over 20 years after his retirement. NBA viewership was at its peak in the 1990s when Jordan was playing. Game 6 of the NBA Finals in 1988, Jordan's final game as a Chicago Bull, is still the most watched NBA game in history, and his shoes are the most popular NBA player's shoe brand in the world. While Jordan made the United States basketball crazy, he's also the main factor in the NBA becoming a global sport. When the 1992 Dream Team went to the Olympics in Barcelona, Michael Jordan was who everyone wanted to see. The USA team dominated the tournament, giving millions of viewers worldwide their first ever glimpse of what NBA basketball players were like. In a time where social media didn't exist, Michael Jordan was able to spread the NBA to fans all around the world. Michael Jordan is the obvious choice to represent the development of the NBA. Abraham Lincoln represents the preservation of the United States on Mount Rushmore. There's no argument there. During one of America's darkest periods, the Civil War, the country was at odds with one another, and Lincoln preserved the country, keeping it from tearing itself apart. While there's no event in the NBA that's even somewhat similar to the Civil War, in the 1970s, the league was in trouble. Low attendance numbers compared to the previous decade, and a bad reputation of drug problems and fights breaking out. Look at this chaos that occurred in a 1977 NBA Finals game. Players began fighting, and then fans started to storm the court and join in. There are multiple instances of things like this occurring in the NBA during the 1970s. NBA Finals games weren't even shown on live broadcasts. They were filmed and then shown later that night after the normal programs. In 1979, the league was given not one, but two saviors. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird represent the preservation of the NBA. The 1979 College National Championship game that featured Magic and Bird is still to this day the most watched live basketball game of all time, reaching an estimated 40 million viewers. These two coming into the NBA was a blessing no matter what teams they ended up on, but they ended up both playing for two of the biggest franchises in NBA history, the Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics, reigniting a rivalry that had been dormant since the 1960s matchups between Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. These two college rivals, who are already two of the most popular players in the country, joining two of the biggest franchises that had a long historical rivalry against each other, is something that you only see in movies. Everything fell into place perfectly for the NBA. Every single finals during the 1980s decade featured either Boston or Los Angeles. They made the NBA must-see TV. Both Magic and Bird are top 10 players in NBA history, and the NBA was lucky enough for their rivalry to fuel the league. I know that Mount Rushmore is only 4 heads, but it would be a disservice to not include one of these two players. They represent the preservation of the league better than any single player ever could. George Mikan, Julius Erving, Michael Jordan, Magic and Bird. This is the true NBA Mount Rushmore. These players all represent the birth, growth, development, and preservation of the NBA, just as the presidents on the real Mount Rushmore represent those for the United States. Let me know in the comments if you think there are any other players that belong on here, and if you enjoyed the video, hit that subscribe button. Plenty of more content coming in the future. Thanks for watching.